There's something deeply haunting about a story that the world forgets, a tragedy that once dominated headlines, only to vanish beneath the dust of history. Some crimes fade because time dulls the horror. Others, because remembering them feels too uncomfortable. Some stories never make the front page. They slip quietly between the cracks, forgotten not because they lacked horror, but because they lacked attention. Ellen Lucas's story is one of them, a name barely whispered now but once. It sent a chill through an entire town. If you search for her today, you'd find almost nothing, just a few brittle newspaper clippings, a single faded photograph, and an old police report gathering dust somewhere. But behind those fragments lies something far more haunting, a life that ended too soon, and a truth that never came to light. Ellen wasn't a headline. She wasn't a scandal. She was simply a young woman, living quietly, loved by a few, known by many. Until one day she was gone. No warning, no explanation, just silence days later. Her body was found in a place no one expected, and what they discovered didn't just raise questions. It shattered the illusion that small towns are always safe. There were marks of struggle, whispers of secrets, and the eerie feeling that someone close might know more than they ever admitted. The investigation that followed felt hurried, scattered, as if the truth itself was being avoided. No arrests, no justice, just rumors, regret, and a quiet fear that settled over everyone who knew her name. Tonight, we're going back to that silence. We're walking through Ellen's final moments, the missteps in the case, and the unsettling theories that still linger. Because the story of Ellen Lucas isn't just a mystery, it's a reminder that even when the world forgets, some stories never really die. They just wait in the dark to be told again. Before she became the subject of a crime that would shake her community and vanish from the public's memory almost as quickly, Ellen Lucas was simply Ellen, a daughter, a friend, a quiet soul in a small town where routines mattered and faces rarely changed. She wasn't the kind of person to draw attention, but if you spent more than a moment around her, you'd remember her. There was something warm in her presence, a softness that made people instinctively trust her, even if she rarely spoke much about herself. Ellen was born in 1974 in a modest but close-knit town in northern Missouri. It wasn't the kind of place that made headlines, just a patch of quiet America where people lived slow, steady lives. The kind of town where everyone knew each other's business by sundown, but still nodded respectfully at the grocery store the next morning. She was the youngest of 3 children in the Lucas family, and the only daughter. Her parents, Mark and Joanne, worked hard to provide for their family, Mark at the local mechanic shop, and Joanne as a receptionist at the town clinic. They weren't wealthy, but their home was filled with warmth, structure, and love. Ellen, in many ways, was their pride. The one who stayed out of trouble. The one who didn't push too hard, but dreamed quietly of a life just a bit bigger than the one she was born into. In high school, Ellen was the kind of student who never stood out academically, but was always well-liked. She volunteered at the local library, worked weekends at the diner off Main Street, and was known for her kindness, especially to those who didn't always receive it. Her friends recall her as observant, thoughtful, and loyal to a fault, even when people didn't deserve it. After graduation, Ellen didn't leave town like some of her peers. Instead, she enrolled in a nearby community college and commuted from home to save money. She majored in early childhood education, a choice that surprised no one. Her dream was to become a kindergarten teacher, to work with children, to shape futures. But the path wasn't easy. She juggled classes with part-time work, often sacrificing sleep and social events just to make it all fit. By her mid-20s, Ellen had settled into a quiet rhythm. She worked full-time at a local daycare center, a job she loved, even when it exhausted her. She lived in a small one-bedroom apartment just a few blocks from her childhood home. She still saw her parents every Sunday for dinner, still called her brothers when the snow hit early, still wrote in her journal every night, a habit she'd kept since she was 12. There were glimpses of loneliness in her life, though she rarely spoke of it. She had dated off and on mostly casually, but never seemed to find someone who really saw her the way she hoped to be seen. Friends said she was guarded in that way, as if she'd learned too early not to expect too much from others. Still, she held out hope. She wanted the quiet things: love, stability, a family of her own someday. Nothing flashy, just a life she could call hers. To those who knew her best, Ellen was a creature of habit. She walked to work the same way each day, ordered the same coffee from the same cafe every Tuesday morning, stopped by the pharmacy every other Thursday to pick up supplies for the daycare kids. She wasn't just predictable, she was grounded, anchored in a routine that made sense to her, and that made those around her feel calm, too. That's why, when she didn't show up for work on the morning of March 13th, 2002, everyone noticed. Ellen wasn't the type to flake. She wasn't late. She didn't call in sick without warning. So when she missed her shift without a message, without a heads-up, alarm bells rang almost immediately. Coworkers called her. No answer. Her parents went to her apartment. The door was locked. Lights off. Car still parked outside. But Ellen? Gone. What started as mild concern snowballed quickly into panic. In small towns, disappearances aren't abstract, they're personal. When someone goes missing, it's not just a news story. It's your neighbor, your classmate, your child's teacher. And with Ellen, that panic came fast and ran deep. Her apartment showed no signs of struggle. No broken glass. No signs of forced entry. Her cell phone was still on the kitchen counter. Her wallet in her purse. Her bed was made. Everything neat. Normal, but she was gone. And just like that, the rhythm of Ellen's quiet life shattered. The person who never caused a stir had become the center of one. It was the morning of March 13th, 2002, Wednesday, and everything about Ellen Lucas's day should have been ordinary. A gray sky loomed over the small Missouri town as residents went about their routines, unaware that by nightfall, that sense of normalcy would be fractured forever. Ellen's schedule was familiar to nearly everyone who crossed her path. She usually woke around 6:30 a.m., took a short walk before breakfast, then got ready for work at the local daycare center, where she had worked for nearly 5 years. She was dependable almost to a fault. That's why the events of that day felt instantly wrong to those who knew her. At 7:15 a.m., her neighbor, Carol Jenkins, saw Ellen from her kitchen window. She was locking the front door of her apartment, wearing her navy blue work jacket, her tote bag slung over her shoulder like always. Carol later told police she looked fine, just like every other morning. Nothing seemed off. That sighting would be the last confirmed time anyone saw Ellen alive. She never arrived at work. By 8:30 a.m., the daycare staff began to worry. Ellen was never late, and she hadn't called in. They tried her phone, no answer. A coworker named Monica drove past Ellen's apartment on her lunch break and saw her car still parked out front. "That's when I knew something wasn't right," Monica later recalled. She would never leave her car if she had gone somewhere else. By 12:15 p.m., Ellen's parents were called. Her mother, Joanne, rushed over to her apartment. The door was locked. No signs of forced entry. No sound inside. Joanne knocked again. Still nothing. They called the police at 12:45 p.m., officially reporting Ellen as missing. Officers from the local department arrived within the hour. There was no immediate sign of foul play, so the report was taken, but no urgent search was launched. At first, it was assumed Ellen may have left voluntarily. Perhaps she needed space, a break, But that theory never sat right with those closest to her. Back at the apartment, things became stranger. Inside, everything was in its place. Her breakfast dishes were washed and drying on the rack. Her phone was on the counter, powered off. Her wallet sat neatly in her purse, which was hanging by the door. Her bed was made, pajamas folded at the foot. There was no sign of struggle, nothing overtly wrong, except that Ellen was gone. By the evening, the tone had changed. Police officers canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything. A few neighbors mentioned seeing her leave that morning, but no one reported anything suspicious. No screams, no loud noises, no vehicle speeding away. But a subtle detail came forward. A man named Harold Crenshaw, who lived 2 blocks away, told police he saw a dark-colored sedan parked along the curb near Ellen's apartment around 7:30 a.m. It was idling with the lights off, he said. Didn't think much of it at the time, but it wasn't usually there. That tip was noted, but no one could ever confirm who the car belonged to. The license plate was never seen, and the vehicle was gone by the time police arrived. The next day, March 14th, volunteers joined local police in searching the surrounding woods and rural backroads. Dogs were brought in. Flyers were printed, but no trace of Ellen turned up. Then, on the 3rd day, March 16th, everything shifted. At 6:45 a.m., a jogger discovered something in a wooded area off County Road 11, about 6 miles from Ellen's apartment. Hidden beneath a patch of brush was the body of a woman clothed, with no visible signs of trauma. It was Ellen. The discovery site was remote, quiet, and difficult to access without knowing the area well. Her belongings were not scattered. Her jacket was zipped, her hands folded across her chest. It was eerily peaceful. But something about the scene felt staged. The autopsy would later reveal that Ellen had died from manual strangulation, and that she had likely been killed the same day she disappeared. Toxicology showed no drugs or alcohol in her system, no signs of sexual assault, no defensive wounds. It was clinical, controlled, intentional. And no one could understand why. There were no suspects, no signs of a break-in, no motive. Ellen hadn't been dating anyone seriously, had no enemies, and lived a relatively private life. As far as the town knew, she was safe, untouchable, out of harm's way. But the silence around her disappearance and the eerie, composed nature of the scene where she was found told a darker story, one that suggested this wasn't random. Someone knew Ellen's routine, knew where she lived, possibly even knew where she would be walking that morning. And somehow they managed to intercept her without anyone seeing, hearing, or stopping it. That Wednesday started like any other, but by sundown, Ellen Lucas was gone, and the question that gripped the town in the days and years that followed was simple and terrifying. How does someone disappear without a trace right in front of us? In the days following the discovery of Ellen Lucas's body, the tone in her small Missouri town shifted from quiet panic to something darker, a slow, creeping realization that no one had answers. And more unsettling still, that maybe no one would. The police response began in earnest on March 16, 2002, the morning Ellen's body was discovered by a jogger. The site was cordoned off by 8 a.m. Forensics teams were brought in. Crime scene photos were taken. Evidence markers dotted the ground, but something was clear from the start. This scene had been carefully chosen. There was no blood, no struggle, no physical evidence that screamed for attention. Just Ellen posed gently, deliberately. The medical examiner quickly ruled the cause of death as manual strangulation, estimating time of death to be the morning of March 13th, within hours of her last confirmed sighting. She had not been sexually assaulted. There were no drugs in her system, no defensive wounds. Her nails were intact, her hands folded calmly, It was, in the words of one investigator, eerily neat. Police began by interviewing those closest to Ellen: her family, co-workers, neighbors, former boyfriends. The obvious starting point: her parents, Mark and Joanne, were devastated. They told detectives that Ellen had no known enemies. She lived a quiet life, rarely went out at night, and focused on work. Her mother remembered one offhand comment a few weeks earlier. Ellen had mentioned she felt like someone was watching her when she walked home at night. But when pressed, she had laughed it off. Police made note of it, but no further context could be found at the daycare where she worked. Co-workers described her as kind, private, and meticulous. No workplace conflicts, no problematic parents. Just a dedicated employee with a routine she rarely broke. Neighbors confirmed that Ellen kept mostly to herself, but was friendly. Carol Jenkins, the woman who last saw her alive, said Ellen appeared normal that morning. No one reported seeing or hearing anything strange, except for the report about the idling sedan, that dark-colored vehicle, spotted by Harold Crenshaw near Ellen's apartment around 7:30 a.m., became the focus of the early investigation. Unfortunately, there were no security cameras on that stretch of road. No license plate was identified, and no other neighbors could recall the vehicle in enough detail to pursue a lead. It became the first of many dead ends. Despite the lack of physical evidence, investigators did compile a list of persons of interest. One was Doug Whitaker, a former boyfriend of Ellen's from 2 years prior. They had dated briefly, but the relationship ended mutually. Doug lived in a nearby town and worked in construction. When questioned, he had a solid alibi. He was working on a job site with multiple witnesses the day Ellen vanished. He also voluntarily submitted to questioning and allowed officers to inspect his vehicle. Nothing suspicious turned up. He was eventually cleared. Another name that came up was Ronald "Ronnie" Dale, a handyman who occasionally did maintenance at the daycare. He was described as friendly, but a little too familiar with some of the women who worked there. One coworker recalled him making comments about Ellen's politeness, saying, "Girls like her are rare, quiet, easy to talk to." When police questioned Ronnie, his behavior was nervous, but nothing conclusive linked him to the crime. He claimed he hadn't seen Ellen in weeks, and he, too, had an alibi, though it was weaker than Doug's. Then there was a stranger, someone no one could identify, but who had been seen near the daycare about a week before Ellen's disappearance. A man in his 30s or 40s, loitering in a parked car, watching the building. A teacher reported it. Police followed up, but found no vehicle registration matching the vague description. Could this have been the same sedan seen on Ellen Street? The possibility was there, but the connection couldn't be proved. One of the greatest challenges in Ellen's case was the lack of physical evidence. Her body, while found just 3 days after she went missing, was clean. No DNA under her fingernails. No skin cells that could be identified. No clear signs of restraint or transportation. The coroner noted that the lack of bruising or trauma outside the neck indicated the killer was controlled. Possibly someone who had done this before or had planned it very carefully. The site itself, being an open-wooded area, offered little. A single partial footprint was found nearby, but was too degraded to analyze. No tire tracks could be confidently identified. Rainfall 2 nights earlier had likely washed away anything that may have helped. Her clothing was intact. Nothing was missing from her apartment, which suggested she had not left voluntarily. She hadn't even taken her wallet. Investigators were left with almost nothing to hold on to. Initially, the local press covered Ellen's case closely. Small-town newspapers printed daily updates. Flyers were distributed. Candlelight vigils were held in the local park. But as weeks passed with no movement, media attention faded. Larger outlets never picked up the story: a missing adult woman with no scandal. Attached didn't draw headlines. Within months, the case went cold. Public perception shifted too. At first, there was widespread sympathy. But as leads dried up, rumors started to fill the silence. Whispers about Ellen's private life. Speculation about secret relationships. Some suggested she had a stalker. Others believed it was someone she knew well, someone hiding in plain sight. But no theory ever stuck. One particularly bizarre moment came when a local psychic claimed she had visions about the murder and led police to a second wooded area. Detectives humored her, and a small search was conducted, but nothing was found. That incident only deepened the public's sense that the investigation had hit a wall. As months turned into years, criticism of the investigation grew. Some locals believed the police had dropped the ball early on. Others felt they hadn't cast the net wide enough. One anonymous source even claimed that a potential suspect had been dismissed too quickly due to connections with a retired city official. But these claims were never substantiated. The last known lead came in 2007, 5 years later, when an anonymous tipster mailed a typed letter to the sheriff's office. The letter claimed Ellen had been killed by someone she knew very well, and that the murder had something to do with something she overheard. No name, no details. The letter was postmarked from a neighboring state, but no fingerprints or DNA were recovered. The letter remains in the case file to this day, despite the early response, multiple interviews, and mounting pressure. Ellen Lucas's murder remains unsolved. Her case has grown cold, but the unsettling quiet around it still lingers. Because if someone could do this and disappear without a trace, what else might they have gotten away with? When a crime is committed, especially one as unsettling as Ellen Lucas's investigators, and the public alike tend to gravitate toward the theory that feels most reasonable, the one that checks the boxes for motive, means, and opportunity. And in this case, the most commonly believed theory focuses on someone close to Ellen, someone who may have known her daily routines and used that knowledge to hurt her. Many believe the answer lies in the form of Ronnie Dale, the maintenance worker who occasionally did odd jobs at the daycare center where Ellen worked. He was in his mid-40s at the time of her death, lived just outside of town, and was known for being a bit too familiar with the women he worked around. Some co-workers described him as harmless, while others admitted to finding his attention toward Ellen slightly inappropriate. In fact, several employees recalled him making comments that, in retrospect, now seemed unsettling. One teacher remembered him saying, "Girls like Ellen don't realize how lucky they are. So quiet, so trusting." At the time, it had just sounded awkward. But once Ellen's body was found, those words felt different, darker. Ronnie had access to the daycare building. He knew the staff schedules. He likely knew Ellen's patterns when she walked, what time she left home, and that she always took the same route every morning. In a town where routine was everything, that knowledge was a powerful thing. Many believe Ronnie became fixated on Ellen, perhaps in a quiet, obsessive way. That fixation may have turned dangerous if she rejected in advance, or simply failed to reciprocate attention he believed he was owed. It's a frighteningly familiar pattern in many true crime cases. A man interpreting a woman's kindness as something more, and responding violently when that illusion collapses. The opportunity, some argue, was there. Ronnie lived alone and worked freelance. His alibi on the day of the disappearance was vague. He claimed to have been working on a private home project, but no one could definitively place him at the time Ellen was last seen. When police questioned him, he appeared nervous and gave inconsistent details about his morning. Still, there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime, and without probable cause, police couldn't pursue charges. Supporters of this theory point out that Ellen had once mentioned to a friend, Justin, passing, that she felt uneasy about someone at work. She didn't name names. She didn't go into detail. But the timing makes people wonder. And if you take Ronnie's proximity, his odd behavior, and Ellen's comment together, the theory gains weight. Motive, rejected attention, or obsession. Means, physical strength and access to her schedule. Opportunity, an unaccounted window of time during her disappearance. It fits. Almost too well, but there's something that doesn't quite add up. For one, if Ronnie had committed the murder, why wasn't there any trace of him? No hair, no DNA, no tire prints, no evidence in his home or vehicle? If this was a crime of impulse, one driven by emotion or rejection, wouldn't there be more mess? More sloppiness? The way Ellen's body was discovered posed, clean, calm suggests a level of control and planning that seems at odds with the kind of person Ronnie was described to be. He was erratic, talkative, and not particularly methodical. Could he really have executed such a clean, calculated murder without leaving behind a single clue? Others argue that Ronnie was too obvious, that the suspicion around him grew not because of solid evidence, but because of how easily the narrative fit a familiar mold. Creepy guy, quiet girl, bad ending. But what if that expectation clouded other possibilities? There's also the problem of the sedan. Harold Crenshaw's sighting of a dark-colored car idling near. Ellen's apartment doesn't align with Ronnie's known vehicle, a battered white pickup. No neighbor reported seeing Ronnie in the area. And if he had used another car, it was never traced. Still, despite the questions, Ronnie remains the prime theory for many in town and some within law enforcement. He was interviewed multiple times, asked to take a polygraph, which he reportedly declined, and eventually moved out of the area altogether a year after the case went cold. That, too, raised eyebrows. To this day, no charges have ever been filed against him. And though the theory remains popular, it's based more on implication than hard evidence. A story that makes sense on the surface, but struggles under the weight of scrutiny. And that leaves us asking, was Ronnie Dale the answer all along, or just the easiest one to reach for? When the obvious theory fails to yield results, and when years pass without arrests or resolutions, some begin to consider the possibilities that lie just beyond the edge of comfort. The unsettling, the unexplained, the quietly disturbing. And in the case of Ellen Lucas, a second theory has emerged. One that's whispered more than spoken out loud, but which still lingers in the minds of those who have followed her story closely. Could Ellen have stumbled upon something she was never meant to see? It's a subtle question, but one that stems from a curious line in an anonymous letter received by the Sheriff's Department in 2007, 5 years after Ellen's death. The letter was typed. No return address. No fingerprints. It simply read, "She overheard something. She told someone. That's why she died." It was someone she trusted. The letter offered no specifics, no name, no confession. But its tone and timing raised eyebrows. Police were never able to trace it. And while many dismissed it as a hoax or cruel joke, others couldn't help but wonder, what if there was something to it? Ellen, by all accounts, lived a quiet, predictable life. But she wasn't naive. She was observant, private, thoughtful, and those who knew her best say she had a habit of picking up on things others missed. Some speculate that Ellen may have witnessed something at work or in the neighborhood that she shouldn't have. A conversation, a transaction, even something as seemingly small as a familiar face in the wrong place at the wrong time. Could it be possible that she saw something, mentioned it in passing, and unknowingly signed her own death certificate? There were rumors never confirmed that a member of the daycare's maintenance or supply staff had ties to a local drug ring. It was minor chatter at the time, dismissed as gossip, but revisited later, in the context of Ellen's murder, it gave some pause. One version of this theory suggests Ellen may have walked in on something at the daycare after hours, perhaps during a weekend, or early one morning. Something that connected someone she knew to a side of them she never expected. Something that needed to be silenced. The eerie calm of her crime scene, the lack of defensive wounds, the neatness of her body's positioning could suggest familiarity. What if she knew her killer? What if she didn't struggle because she wasn't afraid until it was too late? It's hard not to wonder if the person who ended Ellen's life was someone she had trusted implicitly, maybe even cared for. Someone with a reason beyond obsession or opportunity. A reason rooted in self-preservation. This theory, while chilling, gains traction for one simple reason: the clean nature of the crime. There was no sign of chaos, no forced entry, no evidence left behind. This wasn't the act of a volatile stranger. It felt planned, quiet, purposeful. And if that's true, it raises another question. Did someone in Ellen's life orchestrate the perfect crime one built on silence, secrecy, and the unthinkable betrayal of trust? To be clear, there is no concrete evidence supporting this theory. No suspect has ever been publicly named in relation to it. But in the absence of resolution, people begin to piece together what little they have. They look to gaps, inconsistencies, hints dropped in fleeting comments or anonymous letters. Because what's most unsettling about Ellen's murder is not just the act itself, but the idea that someone out there knows exactly why it happened and has chosen to stay silent for over 2 decades, and that silence is deafening. As the weeks turned into months and the months faded into years, the murder of Ellen Lucas began to slip from the headlines. What once held a small Missouri town in its grip of fear and curiosity became something else entirely: a cold case. One more name in the files. One more unanswered question filed quietly away. The police continued their investigation throughout 2002 and 2003. Leads were chased, suspects interviewed, evidence reviewed repeatedly. But no charges were ever filed. No one was arrested. There were no major breakthroughs. And by late 2004, the case had effectively gone cold. What made Ellen's case particularly frustrating was the lack of physical evidence. Despite being found only a few days after her disappearance, there were no fingerprints, no foreign DNA, no signs of a struggle. The wooded area where she was found yielded nothing conclusive. Even her personal items left undisturbed in her apartment offered no hints. And so the community began to speculate. Some blamed the local police department for mishandling early evidence. Others accused them of tunnel vision, focusing too tightly on one suspect while ignoring broader possibilities. There were whispers of leads gone unpursued, of missed connections that might have made a difference. But without anything concrete, all anyone had was frustration. For Ellen's family, the silence was unbearable. Her parents, Mark and Joanne, kept her photo on the mantel. They appeared at every vigil, every memorial, every anniversary. They spoke to the press when the story still had life, and they made quiet pleas for information when it didn't. But year after year, the weight of that silence grew heavier. Their grief never dulled. It simply shifted into something quieter, lonelier. "I just want to know what happened," her mother once told a local reporter in 2011. "That's all. Just the truth." The truth, however, remained elusive. Over the years, a few moments briefly rekindled hope. In 2007, the anonymous letter arrived typed, cryptic, and untraceable. It referenced Ellen having overheard something and implied she was killed by someone she trusted. Detectives followed the lead, but it led nowhere. And just like that, the spark faded. In 2015, another tip surfaced this time. A man in a nearby town claimed his now-deceased brother had once confessed something about a girl named Ellen. The story was vague. The man couldn't provide dates or details. When pressed, he admitted he wasn't sure if it was real or imagined. The lead was recorded and then discarded. The passage of time became one of the case's cruelest elements. People moved away. Memories faded. Evidence degraded. Witnesses who might have recalled a detail lost it to time. Suspects became harder to reach or harder to pin down. And the pain that once felt sharp turned into something dull but constant. Even the police seemed to acknowledge their limits. By 2020, the case had been officially transferred to a cold case division in the state's Criminal Investigation Bureau. Files were digitized. Statements re-reviewed. But as of today, no new evidence has been uncovered. The only enduring constants are the mystery and the family's quiet, unwavering hope. In recent years, Ellen's story has begun to circulate, again shared in online forums, true crime podcasts, and local retrospectives. A new generation of amateur sleuths and digital detectives have taken an interest, poring over old news clippings and archived interviews. Some believe the key to solving the case may still be out there, hidden in a forgotten tip, or in the silence of someone who knows more than they've said. But for now, the trail remains cold. The unanswered questions still echo. Why was Ellen killed? Who posed her body so deliberately, and why? What did she see or know that may have put her life in danger? And most haunting of all, how can someone vanish into the background after committing such a calculated crime? These questions remain just as raw, just as heavy as they did on that March morning in 2002, because the truth about what happened to Ellen Lucas still lingers somewhere in the quiet, just out of reach. Thank you for joining us in revisiting the haunting story of Ellen Lucas. A quiet life ended far too soon, and a mystery that still casts a shadow over all who remember her. If you've heard of this case before, or have your own thoughts, theories, or questions, we encourage you to share them in the comments below. Sometimes, even the smallest insight can reignite a forgotten lead. And if you find yourself drawn to stories like this, quiet, reflective investigations into unsolved crimes and forgotten lives, consider subscribing for more true crime content just like this. We're here to honor the victims, remember the unanswered, and never let these stories fade into silence. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, some mysteries still wait in the quiet.